Thank you very much. Good afternoon. We are happy for being here. Thank you very much, Eugenio, Francesca, Massimo, and hi, Daniele, Francesco, Sonia, and all. Melissa is in a long COVID and she has to rest, but this presentation is part of Critical Geography Collective of Ecuador. We are 18 years old collective of professional linked to geography working in the Ecuadorian Amazon, and our paper calls for a decolonization of urban frameworks. I don't know if you are seeing the purpose of the presentation.
Yes.
Thank you. We propose a discussion on how climate injustices are reproduced in the urban processes as a result of a spatial class struggle. This literature on urbanization has widely discussed how spaces of higher environmental quality are occupied by the upper class who look to enjoy a pristine nature, while the most polluted spaces are occupied by working class. This literature even describes processes of green gentrification. This spatial segregation by class is indeed a fact that structures cities. However, we would like to contribute with two critics to this analysis. On one hand, to recall the notion of space as a product of power relation in order to, one, challenge the fact that the city is not given nor it is static, and two, to consider the climate injustices that today constitute the very process of urbanization. On the other hand, to transcend the local scale of the city by considering the climate injustices that originate at other scales due to the circulation of energy and commodities that connects different cities. For that, we will analyze the urbanization in Ecuador, primarily driven by the extraction and export of oil, which will mainly consumed in the global north. Thus, using extended urbanization as a decolonial urban framework, we propose to analyze the political economy of frontier urbanization based on extractivism as a way of formulating a multi-scale analysis situated in the south, and in order to consider more broadly the class difference in the process of urbanization and the climatic injustices it generates. In terms of methodology, we conducted a multi- and interscalar analysis of the social production of urban space linked to oil extraction in Ecuador, particularly the extraction that occurs in the ITT oil block, which was part of the Yasuni ITT initiative that sought to leave the oil underground in exchange for an international compensation. The initiative became a symbol of climatic justice, but it was cancelled to start drilling the oil. We analyzed the social relations produced in the city Nervi, Yasuni, Tiputini, Pañacocha, Providencia, and Coca, in Quito of the highlands, and in Esmeraldas on the coastline. We used GIS to analyze urbanization, satellite imagery to see the class contrast in urban spaces, as well as extensive file work with meetings, interviews, and observation. But first, how do we theorize climate justice? We start from the fact that the climate change global discussion was a historical opportunity to recognize the uneven geographical development of capitalism, shared but differentiated responsibility to tackle climate change to adapt to it. By this, the international arena meant to emphasize that while all countries have a responsibility for climate change, the geopolitical global north bear the greatest burden to take drastic climatic action. On the other side, the global south, which will face the impacts of climate change, shall access to climate funding by means of climate debt repayments. This differentiated treatment is the basis of climate justice. For our purposes, climate change is also a confirmation of the huge number of raw materials and energy transferred from the peripheries to the capitalist center for the process of planetary urbanization. Of course, as centers and peripheries reproduce in a multi-scalar way as capitalism develops across the globe, we must pay attention to the distinct class differentiation in responsibilities for climate change. Another pivot of our theoretical framework is planetary urbanization, used to explain the emergence of new population clusters. So far, this literature explains that the urban-rural divide was a valid dimension, but at present, the urbanization process will be better expressed by the dynamics of implosion and explosion as opposite but relative movements. Implosion explains the megacity populated but not by non-stop migration, and explosion explains and new roads and cities appearing constantly in previously remote places. The Amazon is often used as an example of these dynamics, and in fact, much of this literature on extended urbanization was formulated in studies of the configuration of Amazon urban networks in Brazil. These dynamics of implosion and explosion around the accumulation of capital at the global level is excellent for analyzing the injustices beneath the process, but also for looking from the south, not only at the capitalist centers in the global north, but also at the urbanization that occurs in places such as Amazon. Urbanization in the Amazon is concentrated around raw materials extraction areas. The oil sports that began exactly 50 years ago promoted a form of urbanization with its own implosion-explosion dynamics. Here, colonial and imperial dynamics move the oil towards the global centers where it is transformed and consumed. But those dynamics also reproduce internal colonies as places where the oil is extracted and transferred to the center where oil royalties produce some wealth. Like a matryoshka, the dynamics are reproduced at different scales. However, there are a multitude of contestation of the strongly classist and racist urban process by the popular classes and indigenous people. Very close to the oil extraction area in the Yosemite National Park, the city of Tiputini has become a large oil camp and arrival basis for workers of all kinds coming from different parts of Ecuador, increasing its population threefold in the last decade. Tiputini's population, unlike the indigenous population that lives in the extraction territories, are mestizo mixed origin. Although with limitation, the city center is well provided of services such as water, electricity, or sewage, while the indigenous communities are slowly being provided of some service after strong disputes with the oil company and the state. On the next scale, we find new nuclei of urbanization along the pipeline and the Napo River, across which the oil is transported to finally be exported to the global north. Here, different communities dispute the production of the urban space, from the acquisition of social housing in the so-called Millennium Cities to the creation of an indigenous neighborhood around the oil port of Providencia. The access to public services such as health, housing, drinking water, and electricity, or infrastructure as part of the extended urbanization has been one of the demands of the indigenous communities of the Ecuadorian oil-producing Amazon. On the next scale, we arrive to the cities of the Amazon, in this case, Coca, as Daniel said, the capital of the Yosemite region. Here we find hotels and middle-class houses close to the river. Unlike the classical urban arrangement, there are no middle or upper-class residential areas because the city maintains a logic of enclave that receives all workers on a seasonal basis, workers who do not establish their family residence in the city. On the other hand, we find a multitude of new neighborhoods populated by internal migrants who arrive in the city attracted by the commercial activities surrounding oil extraction. Informal neighborhoods that emerge without services of any kind in flood-prone areas under intense climate risk that will take years and even decades to consolidate and even achieve a legal status, promoting an urban informality that is part of the injustices neoliberal cities are produced with. In the images, you can see Colinas del Dorado, a population that was resettled because it was in a floodable area on the banks of the river, moved by the municipality to a marshland that is permanently flooded with no access to services. As we have said, we aim to transcend the local scale in order to explain the dynamics of spatial and climate injustices in the process of rentier urbanization in the Amazon. In this sense, the next scale addresses the urban growing in the country's capital, Quito, as the result of oil surplus appropriation within the process of capital accumulation by national elites. In addition, Quito's class configuration is determined by the dispute for access to environmental quality, which demand to exclude oil pollution from elite neighborhoods. So the upper classes that have produced the city through rentier exploitation have progressively occupied the Tumbaco Valley, looking for warmer weather, nature, and the recreation of rural life while cornering the indigenous and peasant territorialities that once stably occupied the valley. The oil pipeline that comes from the Amazon and goes toward the coastline crosses the south of the city as place planned by the elites to allocate the working class, mainly immigrant people who have been arriving in Quito as a result of the successive neoliberal crisis of the last decades in a standard class and racial segregation scheme. And the oil pipeline's route takes us finally to the city of Esmeraldas with a majority of Afro-Ecuadorian population. The oil refinery and export port are located here as a compensation for this development historical gap between this region and the rest of the country. However, the refinery is a source of continuous contamination. Several spills and explosions have occurred, which aggravate the generalized contamination of soil, air, and water, to which the surrounding neighborhoods are exposed due to a total absence of environmental quality policies. The city has also been affected by periodic floods that have killed up to 600 people in the past and are expected to increase with climate change. From here, Ecuadorian oil will reach California, where it will contribute the processes of implosion and economic growth in the United States, leaving a trace of externalities along its way through Ecuador and produces a rentier urbanization full of inequalities and climate injustices. The neighborhoods surrounding the Esmeraldas refinery are opposed to the opulence of the California neighborhoods or to the tourist resort south of Esmeraldas, where the upper classes of Quito spend their holidays. The multi-scalar approach allows us to see that the oil extraction, the burning of which is one of the main sources of greenhouse gases and climate injustices, literally fuels the process of planetary urbanization as part of the unequal geographical development of capitalism. Thus, the implosion effects of urbanization becomes a consequence of the ongoing growth of explosion networks for oil exploitation. This overview shows that environmental inequalities are expressed in multiple ways around the rentier urbanization of Ecuador. A comparative analysis allows us to see that the driving force behind urbanization at different scales has different movements within the process of the configuration of the extractive enclave. In the Napo River nodes of urbanization, the struggle revolves around the access of basic services. In Coca, it is promoted by commercial activities around oil services. In Quito, oil surpluses were appropriated for urbanization that spatially segregates by class and perhaps in ethnicity. And in Esmeraldas, the urbanization triggered by oil exports is embedded in the logics of environmental racism. At every scale, we find the population classes disputing urbanization, whether by demanding an urban development under their own vision. In the Napo River, configuring informal neighborhoods in Coca, limiting urban sprawl around the communes, and configuring neighborhood organization in the south of Quito, or fighting against the externalities of the refinery of Esmeraldas. From the point of view of climate injustices, we argue that these are clearly disputes over the urban process. Fights for accessing drinking water in the context of oil extraction in Napo River, for living in risk-free urban in Coca, for nature in the city for all social classes in Quito, and to prevent pollution and flooding in Esmeraldas are all struggles against climate injustices, even if they are not named such as. This perspective of standard urbanization with the electrical dynamics of implosion and explosion let us jump from the city to the urban process and to observe the complexity of the real world, considering that cities are not given nor static, but a specific moment in the configuration of inequalities that are produced through disputes in which climate injustices are very present. For this reason, the paper aims to reconsider the very notion of the city through a dialogue with the effects that the implosion in the global north implies in the processes of extension implosion in the global south, especially when it reaches areas such as Yasuní. Considering climate injustices from this perspective allows urbanization process to be integrated into the climate thinking, not only considering how cities will transition towards sustainable models, but also considering the process of urbanization itself as a result of the voracity of capital accumulation, which is currently leading to the constant creation of new infrastructure that lead to the emergence of increasingly remote and populated cities. We hope you have enjoyed this multi-scale tour, and we look forward to receiving feedback, criticism, or contributions. Thank you very much.